Okay, let us discuss what is JPA, Java Persistence API. Generally, our Hibernate code will be in which layer? Data access layer of our application. Now, in our DAOs or data access objects, we will be using Hibernate API and writing the code. Hibernate API means what do I mean? Session interface, session factory, query object, transaction object, all these interface which we are using. So in our DAOs, we will be using Hibernate API and writing the program. Now, what is the disadvantage with using Hibernate API in our DAOs? If you are to understand that, let us understand there are a lot of ORM frameworks in the market. Hibernate is only one of the ORM tools. The other tools are like Toplink from Oracle, Kodo from BEA WebLogic, and also Eclipse Link. There are a lot of other ORM tools also which are not even famous. Let's assume today you wrote all your DAO layer, data access layer using Hibernate API, and tomorrow your client wants you to use another ORM framework. He found that say Toplink from Oracle is better than using Hibernate. Maybe tomorrow some other ORM framework may come which might be better than Hibernate. So if you want to switch from Hibernate to that new ORM framework, what all do we need to do? We need to change the whole data access layer, because in all our DAOs we have used Hibernate API, session interface, query, transaction, session factory and all. So we need to change the whole data access layer if I need to use another ORM framework other than Hibernate. So suppose today we started using Hibernate in our data access layer, it is very difficult to switch to another ORM framework, right? Because we need to change the whole layer. It will be very difficult, we will not prefer. So we are locked to a particular ORM vendor, ORM tool vendor, Hibernate in this case. Now what we want is, we want ORM tool vendor independence. Our application should be independent of the ORM tool. We should be able to plug in any of the ORM framework dynamically through some small XML configuration. That's what we want, right? So Java community has released a specification called as JPA, Java Persistence API. JPA is just a specification, means it gives some set of rules, some interfaces to be implemented, right? Hibernate was already present even before JPA was introduced in the market. So this JPA is just a specification, not an implementation. Hibernate was already there in the market. Now what is Hibernate? All these vendors, ORM tool vendors like Hibernate or Toplink, these vendors, Hibernate vendors, what they did was, they wrote an adapter, another module called Hibernate Entity Manager. There is another module called Hibernate Entity Manager. Till now whatever we discussed was Hibernate core module. After this they introduced Hibernate Entity Manager module. This Entity Manager module, Hibernate Entity Manager, is nothing but it will act like an adapter between JPA and Hibernate. What do I mean by adapter? Let us understand very clearly. Now what I want to achieve is, in my DAO layer it should not use Hibernate API. If it is using Java Persistence API in my DAOs, don't use session interface or transaction interface or query interfaces in DAOs. Use the interface given by JPA. So your DAOs will now consist of code using Java Persistence API, right? In your DAOs you will be making calls on Java Persistence API. These calls have to be converted to Hibernate calls, because JPA is just a specification, Hibernate is made as an implementation, right? So Java JPA calls, Java Persistence API calls have to be converted to Hibernate calls. That conversion of JPA calls to Hibernate calls is done by Entity Manager written by Hibernate. So to be very clear, Hibernate was already present in the market before JPA came. When JPA specification is given, as this is a specification given by Java community, it becomes a standard. All the vendors will start implementing that specification. Just like servlet specification given by JE, all the Tomcat, JBoss, WebLogic, WebSphere, whatever is there, they all are implementing servlet specification. EJB specification, what is the implementation of EJB specification? EJB container. So each application server vendor is implementing EJB specification and they have done their own EJB containers. Like that, whenever there is a specification given by Java community, that becomes a standard. The implementations have to be written. Now what Hibernate people did was, they made this Hibernate as a implementation of JPA, so that they can plug in Hibernate inside JPA. How to plug in? They are using an adapter module called as Hibernate Entity Manager, right? So to plug in, we will be able to plug in Hibernate inside JPA. Also, we will be able to plug in top link inside JPA, because they also have written some adapter, top link or whatever, ORM frameworks, Codo or Eclipse link, other ORM frameworks. So inside JPA, we will be able to plug in any of the ORM tools. Now tell me, if in my DAOs, if I am writing code using Java Persistence API, is my DAO independent of any ORM tool? Yes. Let's assume today I am plugging in Hibernate inside JPA. I decided now I don't want to use Hibernate, I want to use top link. So what I will do, I will change some XML configuration, that's all, and it will plug in top link inside JPA, that's all. Now my DAOs are independent of any ORM specific tools, ORMs, right? So JPA is for making our DAOs ORM tool independence. Any doubts? Right. In Hibernate, we have to use something called as a Hibernate Entity Manager, so that JPA calls will be converted to Hibernate specific calls. Okay, now what I will do is, I will write a simple, I will create a JPA project, I will create a project and I will try to insert an entity using JPA. And again, how this JPA has been standardized. Yesterday we have written Hibernate code with annotations, Hibernate mappings using annotations. Actually, if you have observed those annotations, all those annotations like entity, table, one to many, many to one, all these annotations are present in a package called Java X.persistence. So these annotations are not Hibernate own annotations, they are Java Persistence API annotations. They are given by specification. So if you are using annotations given by JPA, then the mappings will be same for all the ORM tools, right? So top link also will be using the same annotation, they have to support the same annotations, right? So now the mappings will not change, right? So let us see now, I will let a simple JPA project, we will start working on it, right? Okay, now I am creating a new project. JPA demo I will create. Next, I will import all the libraries. And one more thing before starting up with this code, some theory. Actually, JPA is part of EJB specification, EJB 3 specification. Earlier version of EJB was EJB 2.x. In EJB 2.x, there were entity beans which were having the database specific code. One entity bean represents a row inside the database, in one of the database table, right? But one entity bean represents one table. An instance of entity bean represents one row inside the table. Just like entity, we are mapping our class as entities, right? One entity corresponds to one table. One instance of entity belongs is telling about one row, right? Okay. So entity bean is nothing but, okay, entity bean represents one table inside the database. But EJB specification, EJB2 specification was considered to be heavyweight, because to write a simple entity bean also, we have to write a lot of interfaces, implement lot of interfaces, and also write lot of mapping files. To write a simple entity bean, it was very difficult. Even when, if you have to write a relationship between two entities, again it was so complex. So EJB2 was considered to be heavyweight. Especially in EJB2, entity bean was considered to be heavyweight. So when they were releasing EJB3, they thought, okay, we should make this entity bean simple. So they removed entity beans from the EJB specification when they are giving EJB3 specification. Instead of entity beans, they are using Java Persistence API in EJB. So JPA is part of EJB specification. EJB specification is part of JEE specification, right? So JEE, what is it? It is a superset of all specifications, right? Servlet specification, EJB specification, JNDI, JMS, all these specifications together is called as JEE. Inside JEE, EJB is a subspecification. Inside EJB, JPA is a subspecification. So we can use JPA inside an EJB container also. Also we can use JPA outside EJB container also. Till now what we did, we never used EJB container. We were using outside EJB container, right? If you are deploying your JPA entities in EJB container, the container will manage the life cycle of your entities, right? Okay, now let us come back and we'll start writing our code. Okay, now what I'll do is I will copy composition, whatever is present inside composition, or any of the project you take. I'll take simply composition, copy and paste inside JPA demo. See this user class and address class. Now user is composed of address. We have used embedded annotation here, and also here we have used embeddable annotation. If you see all these annotations are from Java x.persistence. These are JPA annotations only. So now the mappings will not change. We will use the same mappings, but we will now see how to use Java Persistence API to save these objects. Mappings are exactly same. In JPA we use annotations for mapping. There is no XML file configuration. We use annotations. Already we have done all the annotations for all the projects. So now I can take any one of them and start using with JPA. Okay. Now tell me, what is the main configuration file where we configure connections and all in Hibernate? cfg.xml. But in JPA, the main configuration file is persistence.xml file, right? Persistence.xml file should be present in meta-inf folder, which is present inside the class file, right? So what we are doing is, inside our source directory here, we have to create a folder meta-inf. Meta-inf should be in your build path or class path, and inside this we have to create persistence.xml. Persistence.xml is an XML file. Every XML file will be following some DTD or XSD, right? We don't know what is the DTD, so I'll try to copy paste persistence.xml, right? Okay, now all of you go to the Hibernate, this project, this folder, Hibernate folder. I have shared you for Hibernate training here, Hibernate distribution folder. Go to this distribution folder. Inside it, project folder, and inside it, here you have Hibernate-nverse. You can see here Hibernate-entity manager. This is what I was talking, which will act like an adapter between Hibernate core and JPA. Okay, now here if you go and see Hibernate inverse, go inside source, demo, here you have a demo, and inside it resources you have meta-nf persistence.xml. So this here persistence.xml is present. What I will do is I will just now copy this persistence.xml and paste it inside meta-nf folder. Okay, once more, see this part if you are confused. In Hibernate distribution folder, project, inside project, Hibernate inverse, inside that source, demo, resources, meta-nf, here is persistence.xml is now in meta-nf. I am opening it. Here you can see there is a root tag is persistence. Under this we have persistence unit tag. What is this persistence unit? Now, if you need to understand about persistence unit, answer my question. Can one application connect to more than one databases? Yes, it is possible. So, how do you manage transactions in that case? Okay, when your application is using more than one databases, the transaction should span over the two databases. Then we have to use something called as distributed transactions. We will use JTA, Java Transaction API, for configuring the distributed transactions. We will see that when talking about transaction management tomorrow. How to deal with distributed transactions, we will see it tomorrow. But now we understood that one application can talk to two databases or more than one database, 2 or 3 or 4. For each database, if I am using Hibernate, tell me where am I giving connection creation parameters? In Hibernate.cfg.xml, right? No, here see Hibernate.cfg.xml, here I am telling how to connect to my database, right? Okay, this is a different cfg.xml which is connecting to Oracle, wherever it is. If you just see here Hibernate.cfg.xml, here inside session factory tag, we are telling about how to connect to database, right? So in Hibernate, if your Hibernate is talking to more than one database, for each database you need to have a separate session factory, because in one session factory you are telling about how to connect to database, how to make connections to the database. So if your application is using two databases, what you have to do is you have to create two cfg.xml files. Let's assume that your application is using two databases, one database in MySQL and one database in Oracle, right? You can write two cfg.xml files, oracle.cfg.xml, mysql.cfg.xml, right? In oracle.cfg.xml you will write how to connect to Oracle. In mysql.cfg.xml you will write how to connect to MySQL, right? So suppose if you have a requirement where you need to save one row inside Oracle database and one row inside MySQL database, tell me how many session factories do I need to create? Two session factories, because one session factory for database. So you have to build session factories, right? How do you build session factories with? Yes, I will show you the demo file here. If you see the demo here, what am I doing here? .configure I am using, right? If I use cfg.configure, it will load from hibernate.cfg. But this configure method is overloaded. There is a configure method which is taking string file name as parameter, right? So while creating configuration, you can pass oracle.cfg.xml to this method. This will load configuration from Oracle, and from this configuration you build one session factory and create another configuration object which you will read from mysql.cfg.xml, right? So two databases means two session factories, right? Any doubts? Okay. Now here, coming to persistence.xml, we are having a persistence unit tag, right? And I have given a name also to identify this persistence unit. There is a name. In JPA, you will have one persistence unit per database. Okay? And we are giving a name to this persistence unit so that I can identify persistence unit with this name. Right? Now let's assume our application using JPA is connecting to two databases. Now, how many persistence.xml are required? One only. Inside same persistence.xml, I can write two persistence unit tags with different names, right? So one persistence unit tag with for every database, and persistence unit is identified by using name. Okay. Now see this next tag, provider. What is the provider? arg.hibernate.ejb.hibernate persistence. This is the tag where I am plugging in Hibernate. This is saying that the persistence provider is Hibernate. Suppose tomorrow you want to use a different persistence provider like Toplink, you have to change this slide to use r.hibernate.ejb.toplink persistence, right? So that's the reason why I said ORMs can be pluggable inside JPA. We can just change this tag, and then here we are writing class tags. Our classes are having annotations, right? So we have read class tags of these annotations. Now in my application I have only one class, arg.infinite. Okay, now I have only one class here, arm.infinite. Okay, so I mapped my class which is having annotations. Then here I am saying exclude unlisted classes. Means I am asking the JPA to use only the listed classes. Don't scan the classes which are having annotations automatically. Right? Okay. Then here are the properties. In hibernate.cfg.xml you are configuring about hibernate.dialect. Right? See here we configured hibernate.dialect, connect our class name, passwords, everything. The same configurations have to be configured here also, right? But by default, what is the default database for Hibernate? Hypersonic SQL database, HSQLDB, right? That is why it is already configured with HSQL dialect. Now we are using MySQL. We have to replace it with our MySQL dialect, and we have to change all these URLs, driver name, password. Yes, you can uncomment it and comment, and you can comment this and you can uncomment it, right? Or what I'll do is I'll just copy paste. We'll use the same thing here. So the driver name is this one. I'll copy paste for driver class. This is my URL. And also dialect I need to copy. This is my dialect. So whatever we were configuring earlier in hibernate.cfg.xml, we are configuring the same here also. And my username is root. Here also password is. And here you can see hbm to ddl.auto is update. Okay, let it be. Now I want to uncomment this one also. Show SQL and format SQLs. Okay. And here there are something called as event listeners. We didn't talk about what is an event listener till now in Hibernate. We will be discussing it tomorrow. Event listeners, interceptors, filters, everything we will be discussing it tomorrow. So I'll just comment this. We are not using it right now. Okay. So this is the configuration file persistence.xml, and here this unit name is used to identify my application uniquely, my persistence unit uniquely. So I'll give my own name and say JPA. This name I will be using in my program. Okay. Now let us start writing the program using JPA. Okay, I'll write the class. I'll write a new class, JPA demo. I'll take main method, finish. Okay, I'm just parallelly opening Hibernate code also. What was the first thing? The first thing was to build a session factory. For building session factory, we did all this in Hibernate, right? Similarly here, the first step in JPA is to load this persistence unit. Persistence unit is having all the configurations, right? So to load this persistence unit, see here, persistence dot create entity manager factory. This is the method, persistence dot create entity manager factory. It's asking for a persistence unit name. What is the unit name I gave here? JPA demo. What is it returning? Create entity manager factory. It is returning entity manager factory. I'll take it in this reference. Entity manager factory EMF. Okay, what is this entity manager? This is equivalent to session factory. Entity manager factory is equivalent to session factory. Internally, JPA is using Hibernate only. So internally, this is creating session factory of Hibernate. Entity manager factory is similar to session factory. Okay, coming back to Hibernate code, after getting session factory, what did we do? We created sessions. Session factory will produce sessions. Entity manager factory will produce entity managers. So I will use EMF dot create entity manager, which will return me an entity manager object. Tell me the equivalent object. Yes, entity manager is equivalent to session. Why did this name come? Tell me, which is the object? Yes, correct. When using Hibernate, session was managing life cycle of entities. Can I say like that? Yes. If I say session dot save, it's converting transient object to persistent. Session dot update is converting detached object to persistent. Session dot remove will create a persistent object to transient. Like that, session object is managing the life cycle of entities here, right? Entities are managed by session in Hibernate. Here, entities are managed by entity manager. So entity manager will manage the life cycle of entities in JPA. Then, after we get entity manager, we have to begin a transaction. So entity manager dot get a transaction will give me an object of entity transaction. So I'll take it in entity transaction reference. then begin the transaction, finally commit the transaction, then close the entity manager. Internally, entity manager is equivalent to session, right? JPA calls are internally converted to Hibernate calls only, right? Now what I want to do is I want to create an object of our user class and then save it. Okay, here I just change the table name of our user, JPA underscore annotation underscore user underscore comment. So I want to create an object of user and save it here. So creating object of user, u is equals to new user, then u dot set name something x, u dot, okay, first of all again I have to create address object, new address, address dot set city, address dot set country, then I will set this address to user dot set address. Then I want to save this. If it was Hibernate, I was using session.save. Here entity manager dot persist. This is equivalent to session.save. That's all. This should save the user object in the database. Run it and see. I am running it. Oh, I got an exception. Class not found. Oh, spelling mistake. Infinite I used. Okay, now I'll run it. Yeah, it got inserted. One row got inserted. Let me show you the table. Yeah, the table is JP underscore user. It got inserted, right? There is a parameter called hibernate.archive.autodetection. Value is equals to class comma HBM. So it will automatically scan the whole class path for all classes which are annotated with entity. We need not write a separate class tag in this case if you use this property, right? Here I am telling to scan for all the HBM files and class tags, right? When you are using JPA, it is not recommended to use HBMs because your code will not be portable. If you are using HBMs, HBM files are particular to Hibernate. You are not supposed to use, right? In this class. So if you use this configuration, hibernate.archive.autodetection value is equals to class, automatically Hibernate will scan for the class path for classes annotated with entity annotation. We need not specify class tags explicitly. Okay? Any other doubts? In Hibernate we have session.get to get an entity by primary key. In JPA we have to use entity manager.find to fire a query for based on primary key. Okay, I will write it now. Entity manager, first of all I will comment this user object here. I want to fire a query now. entity manager dot find. Find is taking two parameters. Find what user dot class. With primary key 1. What is the return type of this find? See, it is returning user, because find is implemented like a generic method. Whatever we are passing, user dot class I pass, so it is returning user. I need not typecast now, I can directly take it in user object. Then I'll print the name. U dot get name. Now I'll run it. Let us see whether it will fire select query based on primary key or not. Yes, it fired select query based on primary key, and it also printed the name of the user. Fine. Next, let us see how to fire a HQL query. In Hibernate we use HQL, Hibernate query language, but in JPA we use JPA query language, right? JPA is almost 99% same as HQL, right? Only some small, very rare changes are there. Otherwise, it is exactly same as HQL. Why is it same? Because when Java community was releasing JPA specification, when they are making JPA specification, the people who are involved in JPA specification were from Hibernate team. The developers who developed Hibernate were involved in JPA team. So actually JPA specification was mostly influenced by Hibernate developers. So almost JPA looks like Hibernate only. So Hibernate query language is exactly say almost 99% same as HQL. 1% there are some small changes, right? Now what I'll do is I'll try to fire a JPA query using this API. So now I'll comment both. See, why is JPA? Purpose of JPA is to standardize the way of writing the DAO layers, ORM independence. So now JPA queries are standardized now. Hibernate team influenced JPA team, and HQL is same as JPA query. But top link queries are not same as JPA, right? Top link queries may be different. The advantage is as Hibernate developers were involved in the team, HQL is looking like JPA query. Okay. If you are writing, okay, let us see. By using session.create query, we fired select query yesterday, right? Similarly here, entity manager dot create query. You can pass a query. I can just say from user. It is returning me an object of query. Query from Java x.persistence. Whatever we are importing are from Java x.persistence now. Then, if I say query dot get result list, I will be getting the list of users. Then I will iterate through these users. For user, Okay, this should fire a select query on the table. Now run it. Yes, see, it fired a select query and printed the username, right? Now tell me, I am using from user, right? What is this? Is it the table name? No, it is a entity name, the class name by default, right? Now coming to user.java, here I can give name to entity also. Name is equals to X, I'll say. By default, if I am not giving name here for the entity, class name is assumed to be the entity name, right? In my queries, I have to use entity names only always. Now as I have given name X here, in my query also I have to use from X, right? By default, class name is assumed to be the entity name. That's why we always use class names. Now I can run the same query. It will execute and fire the select query, same, right? Now if I want to remove an entity in Hibernate, session.delete, right? Similarly here, entity manager.remove is there. Entity manager.remove is internally invoking session.delete. Like that, for every method on session, there is a corresponding method on entity manager. That's all. Entity manager JPA, Java Persistence API, is giving us some interface, and Hibernate is providing an adapter. Internally, it is Hibernate only, right? All the concepts which we learned for Hibernate are applicable to JPA also, right? Just you need to know about the various methods, corresponding methods, right? We talked about all the very common methods. Okay, so we'll finish JPA. We just gave JPA introduction. Just finished JPA introduction. Now we'll see how to fire HQL queries. We'll concentrate on HQLs.